Welcome to Supercool, the show about extraordinary climate solutions that cut carbon and improve modern life. Each week on Supercool, we go behind the headlines to pinpoint the stories and data accelerating the low-carbon economy in towns and cities across the U.S. and around the globe. I'm your host, Josh Dorfman. For 5 years, beginning in 2005, I lived in an apartment in Brooklyn. As my first green media company called The Lazy Environmentalist was growing, I would take the subway every day into Midtown Manhattan and wind my way to the Sirius satellite radio studio where I'd host my show. I was usually running late, which is my nature, and I was also simultaneously growing a sustainable furniture company called Vivavi, so I was constantly trying to cram a lot in. I would do the walk run down Manhattan side streets to get to the studio before my live show actually started. And I would try to gather my thoughts as I was moving quickly, rehearsing the show opening, thinking about the guests, and really, there was just one thing that could throw me off from my daily chaotic routine. And that one thing is something very common to New York City's side streets. It's the overwhelming sight and smell of trash. Garbage bags piled on top of each other up and down sidewalks, some splayed open with their contents spilling out. Sometimes I'd think maybe I'd try a different side street to cut across from Madison to Fifth Avenue, maybe go down to 39th or 38th, but there was no escape. Turning another corner, it was clear. Trash had overtaken the city. And then, just as I'd think this can't get any worse, I'd hear that low guttural roar of a garbage truck lurking, coming up behind me. Fumes spewing, smell suffocating. Just the worst. And if you ask a New Yorker, they'd shrug and say, well, what are you going to do? That's just the way it is. Everyone in every city everywhere has to deal with it. Or do they? On today's show, we're looking at cities that have found another way. The solution, in fact, to this nightmare scenario was invented over half a century ago in Sweden by a company called Envac. They came up with the idea of sending out the trash underground and developed a system of pipes using pneumatic technology to whisk away trash bags at speeds of over 40 miles per hour, traveling below the streets to a centralized collection area. A hospital was the first client in 1961. Then they built a system for a neighborhood, and steadily Envac grew the business. Today, 63 years later, systems are in place globally from Beijing to Barcelona and Seoul to Stockholm. Disney World installed the first U.S. system in the 1970s, which still operates. Roosevelt Island, sitting in New York City's East River, installed an Envac system a few years later, and it still serves over 11,000 people. While millions and millions around the world now enjoy the benefits of sending out the trash below ground, for a very long time, the trail went cold in America. But a few years ago, the Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, which is consistently ranked one of the top children's hospitals in the world, installed an Envac system. And we're going to hear about the hygiene and waste disposal benefits to hospitals of Envac system on today's show. We're also going to hear about the benefits to cities that install these underground automated pneumatic waste collection systems. These include up to 90% reduction in carbon emissions, safer and quieter neighborhoods, better air quality, higher recycling rates, lower municipal operational costs, more street space for bike lanes, trees, park benches, sidewalk cafes, and other urban amenities, and greater resilience against extreme weather by moving key infrastructure underground. Envac is also upping its tech stack so users can track how much waste they're tossing or saving through gamification. And smart sensors enable touchless disposal, allowing people to toss their trash without coming anywhere near a handle. Joakim Karlsson, CEO of Envac, joins us on the show. It's a role he's been in since 2016. Today, Joakim oversees a company working in 35 offices in 20 countries. Envac is on a mission to take waste to a whole new dimension. Here's my conversation with Joakim. Joakim, welcome to Supercool.
Thank you very much, Josh, for having me on this. I'm super excited to be in the Supercool podcast. Love that.
I'm glad we can make the different geographies work and find a time that works for you and your global travels as you're building Envac. One of the things you said recently that really caught my attention, and I'm just going to quote you. This was from earlier this summer. You were on stage in Rio de Janeiro at a conference talking about Envac, and you said, "We are not just taking waste to another level, we are taking waste to another dimension." And that, of course, struck me because most people don't talk about waste in those terms. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. What we do in Envac, we enable smart communities and power the circular economy by redefining how we actually think about waste. So I would like to say this is a new dimension, because could you imagine a city without waste trucks and dirty bins? That's exactly what we are doing. We believe it should be a natural part of the underground infrastructure, as natural as sewage, water, and electricity. So it's a new idea, even if it has been tested and proven for a long time, especially in Sweden.
I love this idea of why not make waste management, why not, if you have the opportunity, why not integrate that into the infrastructure of a city or a commercial development? So it does function like how we treat water or we treat sewage, right? The other thing, Joakim, as we get started here, that is fascinating to me, and perhaps this is the right way to go back to the founding story of Envac, is that the founding story of Envac dates back to the 1960s. I mean, it dates back to the 20th century.
Yeah.
So you're talking about technology. When people hear it today, right? When people are listening to this podcast, or I talk to my friends and I say,
like a new idea.
It sounds like the Jetsons. It sounds like the future. But the future was invented in the 1960s, and now it seems, and of course you've been building this business for many decades, but the world is starting to catch up to an idea that came a little bit ahead of its time, even though you were building a market for it. So can you take us back to the founding story of Envac, how that came about, and what those early days were like as the business was growing?
Of course, and I would like to start to say I firmly believe that curiosity and courage are the engines for progress, and also that questioning is the starting point of innovation. And that mindset was the foundation of Envac. So we have to go back, as you said, rewind the tape to the early 60s.
Yeah.
And when a groundbreaking conversation took place in Sollefteå Hospital, it's a hospital in the far north of Sweden. And it was during a discussion with the technical director in the hospital and the managing director of Centralsug, now Envac, that foundation, the Envac waste management system. So at that time, Envac name was Centralsug, and the core business was dust cleaning device, so central dust cleaning device. And of course, the topics started with a new dust wasting system to the hospital. But then the discussion took an unexpected turn when the idea of applying the same vacuum technology to the waste management. So the technical director in the hospital explained, okay, dust is one problem, but my biggest headache is the waste handling. And then this novel question appeared from him. If you can vacuum the dust from every corner of the hospital in one system, why can't you do the same thing with waste? And driven by curiosity, our managing director at that time, Mr. Olof Hallström, embraced this challenge. And already back then, we had very good engineers in the company, so they sketched, they designed, they tested the solution. So Mr. Hallström come back to the hospital, to the customer, and said, okay, we can do it. And there was a brave customer that said, let's do it. So the first system was installed already 1961. So that was the beginning of the story of Envac.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have a kind of frustrated, forward-looking customer in a hospital system who says, "Hey, let's try and do something that would create a lot of benefit for the hospital from just a waste management perspective." Okay, so the pneumatic waste collection system goes into the hospital. People are delighted, thrilled, surprised. This is happening. Probably takes a little bit for news to spread. And then in Stockholm, in Sweden, that continues to grow. And now it starts to shift or expand into residential neighborhoods, right?
Yeah. So the core business was transition to the waste collection. And there was a demand, especially in the bigger cities like Stockholm. And during that time, during the 70s, we were building a lot of new areas. And also the driver here was to have an efficient and good working conditions for the waste collection. So in Sweden now, we started to accelerate this solution.
And so, Joakim, before we just go further, for our audience, tell us, what are the benefits of this system? I know for different customers, there's different benefits in work in healthcare, and I want to stay on healthcare. We're going to come back to that because that's fascinating how that's growing. But for neighborhoods and residences and cities, how do you explain the benefits for someone in their community or their neighborhood?
Absolutely. So if we look into the solution, with smart technology, we are moving the waste in pipes underground. So that's eliminating the waste trucks in the city centers. And that makes a huge difference in getting rid of emissions, getting rid of CO2, getting rid of particles into the air. But it's also increase the accessibility, the cleanliness and the safetyness in the city. And looking at where we are now, we also digitize the waste system so the customer can have a detailed view on how the recycling and other related activities really are doing. That's how the system works. And from that, you have a lot of values, both in cost perspective, in environmental performance, like reducing the carbon emissions, and also in a quality of life perspective. So we help the cities to reduce all this transportation. So instead of going around with a garbage truck to all the houses, we take the waste to central collection points. That minimizes the transportation a lot. It minimizes the manual labor a lot. That significantly lower the cost and providing a long-term savings for the municipality and operators. And also when it comes to return on investment, we help our customer to maximize the space utilization in the living environment. So instead of building waste rooms and take place for that, our underground infrastructure free up all the valuable space, allowing areas for high value users, building more apartments, bike rooms, parking, etc. So that's help and enhance the property value and the return on the investment, both for the private and public stakeholders.
When I came across your company, when I came across Envac, and I started reading about this over the summer and just got my jaw dropped, right? I mean, because I've lived in many cities. I've lived in New York City. I don't know, maybe I know I'm sensitive to noise. So garbage trucks drive me nuts. I'm sternly sensitive to smell. And I have felt there is nothing. Hell for me would be just walking back and forth on 30th Street between like 8th Avenue and 9th Avenue in Manhattan for eternity, right? Because on a summer day when those trash cans are out and the smell is like, it's wretched, right? And it's not just the smell, but there's trash on the streets, there's waste bags, trash bags spilling over, there's garbage cans, you got to walk around stuff, and it's like, it's awful. And so I know a system went in Disney World, in like the early 1970s. There's one on Roosevelt Island in New York City.
Yeah.
I think there's one more coming on the Polo Grounds in New York City soon. So that's really exciting. But we don't see these systems. All we see is a terrible, terrible living experience that we just feel like is normal. And it doesn't even occur to us that there's any other alternative, right? We have no concept of Envac. And so that's why when I think about it, just from the resident perspective of, wow, wait, so you're saying I could walk out my apartment door and I would avoid everything that I just described. And there would actually, I mean, you talk about more space for like bike parking or freeing up space to do more development, but you could also free up more space on the road, right? Literally on the street.
Exactly. So I think that's a very important part to enhance the quality of life and community well-being, so make the environment cleaner, safer, and more attractive. And we can see, because now we help the customer to improve the aesthetic and urban design. And much of this because we get rid of the garbage trucks. And that also leads to a very important theme here to reduce the emissions, the carbon emissions, particles, because we take away 90% of the transportation and as much more like in the emissions. So there is a lot of benefit, both from a cost perspective, environmental perspective, and quality of life perspective.
Can we drill into the cost perspective for a second?
Yeah.
So I guess there's probably two ways to think about it. If I'm, as a resident, I'm paying for trash removal, right? I'm getting billed monthly for that. When like in the hauling system, when the garbage truck's coming and taking away my trash. I know that your system probably in different cities probably works in different ways, but generally, what's the experience like for someone? How do you talk about that with potential customers?
Yeah. Because we are reducing all the traffic with waste trucks and all the labor you need, you reduce that cost. And that's a lot. So, for example, in Sweden, we have a special fee, and that should be from a self-cost analysis. And if you make this cost analysis and compare to traditional waste handling, the collection is 50% lower in price. And that's
50% lower.
50%, yeah.
Operationally lower to run this system.
And
wow. Okay.
if we see the future, labor cost will not go down in price, so the index for that will be a profit. So that's one. Then if we look into for the developer or the real estate owner, you don't need any waste rooms inside the house or outside. So you can use that space for other things. And if you should have a good recycling, you need around 0.5 to 1 square meter for each resident. And if you sum that up, it's a lot of square meters, or as you said, square foots.
Oh, yes, right.
That you can use for a more valuable thing. And if you add that on, you also will have a really feasible cost analysis if you compare this to traditional. And this is just the beginning, because dollar you can count, but then you have all the other benefits that it's hard to put a dollar on, the environment, quality, etc.
Absolutely. So I know we've jumped around a bit. We talked about in the 60s. I was amazed to learn that Disney World was like, yeah, we want the system. It's actually still in place, still operating. Have you been there? Have you gone to see that?
Unfortunately not. But you mentioned Roosevelt Island. There I have been, in New York. And that was also installed, in the mid-70s.
One of the things I heard you say about the system in Roosevelt Island, and I know that serves still today about 10,000 residents, which is very exciting, and the vision, the Roosevelt Island wanted to be very futuristic, forward-looking in how they built that development. But you mentioned, and I didn't know this, but I was living in New Jersey in 2012 when Hurricane Sandy struck, and all of the devastation that created across the metropolitan area. And I didn't know, but I heard you say that the Envac system, the waste collection pneumatic tube system in Roosevelt Island, weathered that storm from a resilience perspective
Yeah.
much better than the rest of the systems that were shut down across the city.
Yeah. And that's also a strong advantage and value for the customer, especially due to what we see in the world, that this is a system that is resilient, both for storms, as you mentioned, and where I live in Sweden, a lot of snow. And also here, if it's chaos with the traffic, etc., you will have a good function with the waste collection, even if it's storm like Sandy. So that
cyclone,
value
hurricane
is becoming more and more interesting, also for especially now for new development.
One of the things about that, Joakim, that we've been talking about at Supercool is this idea of when you think about climate resilience, when you think about a changing climate, there's not many solutions that are both, it enables us to become more resilient to climate change and also mitigate our carbon emissions at the same time. So Envac, the system can reduce carbon emissions by up to 90%, and then you build infrastructure that can withstand storms, what's coming, what we're dealing with as the climate changes. And we've had this, as we've started Supercool, looking at systems like Envac, looking at systems like sewer heat recovery systems, right? Yeah. Or district heating and cooling, or capturing energy for you, so out of the sewer, or from data centers and funneling that heat underground, right? So having this underground infrastructure that is kind of climate infrastructure in a way, right? That helps us build the kind of future where we're cutting carbon, we're more resilient against a changing climate. And I guess that goes to what you said in your first comment, Joakim, about wanting to make waste collection, sending it underground through pneumatic tubes, just part of city infrastructure, right? So we trying to change the model of how we think about it. So I guess that's probably a very big push that you're working on around the globe when you're communicating the value.
Yeah. And you have it right on the point. And especially now we can see that more and more cities, more and more customers understand that a smart waste management enables to build this sustainable city. So we can see a rise in the interest because we can help the city, help the customers in many ways.
Now I referenced this, some of the comments that I saw you make. You were on stage in Rio de Janeiro over the summer, or working with a district in Riyadh, right? Yeah. Can you tell us about that project?
Yeah, it's a new build area in Riyadh. It's called King Abdullah Financial District, and they put the target high also when it comes to make a sustainable and a smart city. So we come in contact with them 10 years ago, and they understand this is the future. So we would like to have this. It's state-of-the-art system for the waste collection, but it's also have sustainability benefits. So that was the starting point, and we can see that I'm sitting right now in Dubai, where we also have an office. So all over the world, you start to think to have a good holistic solution. And if you make a good waste collection, waste management solution, that will be a good foundation for the whole development. If the waste handling is the last thing you start to think about, that will be the first thing you can see not working.
Okay, yeah, I could understand that. One of the things the gentleman said from CAF in that conversation, within 10 years, he said, we currently globally have about 2 billion tons of waste, right? And he talked about how big this industry is going to get. I think he said a number that was somewhere $1 or $2 trillion, which was staggering. But if you think about 2 billion tons of waste and you think about a solution like Envac, before starting Supercool, I had a company called Planted, and we make building materials, and we do it from this fast growing grass, and it grows much faster than trees. So we think about pulling carbon from the atmosphere and locking it away, right?
Interesting.
And everyone's trying to get to, the aspiration is a gigaton of carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere, right? All these solutions, can we get to a gigaton? So our civilization is creating about 50 gigatons, let's say, of carbon dioxide every year, right? So we're trying to remove 1 gigaton. So that's 1 billion tons.
Yeah.
Billion metric tons, right? If there's 2 billion metric tons of waste every year, right? That is, I mean, just rough math, that is at least 2 billion tons of carbon, at least, probably much more, that is contributing to climate change from our waste. And it's probably much more of that, much higher if you think about methane in a landfill or what happens even, but just waste in general. So this is massively important that cities figure this out. And I'm asking this, and I'm curious, today, as you run this company, it's a global company, you're in many, many markets. How is Envac growing today? Where are you seeing growth? Who is adopting this kind of solution now that that the world really does seem increasingly attuned to, ready for, and wants to put in place?
Yeah. And what you are saying here, before I answer where we are and where we see demands and potential, looking into solution that helps to minimize waste, increase the recycling and sorting, drive the circular economy, it's very important. That's also what we are looking into very much. And for the moment, we making a transition from a physical and add the digital transformation to the system, to have a data-driven feedback to the users, to encourage the behavior. So you, Josh, could see on an application, we call it Reflow, how good you have been in sorting the waste. You can compare that with Aaron. No, not the person, but in the neighborhood.
He's better than me.
Yeah. in the city. But I think this is very important also. So to add digitalization to help people to improve the behavior when it comes to sorting and waste minimization. So to lower the carbon footprint and recycle the material and reuse the material in the very best way. And that's also very important for our customers that we can help them with. And to answer your question, we started in a very humble way in Sweden, a long way back. So, of course, the Scandinavian markets now looking into this solution, but we can see the same demand in all over the world. So today we have 35 offices in 20 countries. So we work in North Europe, we work in EMEA, and for us that is South Europe, and here then in the Middle East, China, Southeast Asia, developing a lot and looking into eco-cities, and also in Korea and Australia. And since quite recently, we also have a footprint in United States. So
Great.
We have now been in the United States market now for 2.5 years. So our strategy is, of course, to find the markets, but then it's very important we see it as a repetitive market because we are very long term. And for the moment, the strategy is to strengthen our position where we already are established.
Let's talk about, if we can, let's talk about China for a second, because I read a news article about Envac, about you and your visit to China. I think it was last year in 2023. And Xinhua, a news agency, had a big article on you. Not a lot of people, non-Chinese get big articles about them. And Xinhua, a news service, I thought that was, I lived in China in the 1990s. And I worked in some factories there for a bicycle lock American company.
Okay.
So, yeah, I have some familiarity with China. And Joakim, what I found interesting about Envac and what I think is interesting about China is that as Americans, we don't have a real sense of the level and speed of development in China, right? We don't really understand that Shanghai has a bigger skyline than New York City, right? A more modern skyline. We don't, and from a climate perspective, we don't really grasp that even one city like Shenzhen has more electric buses in their public transit system, 16,000, than all of America combined. Like that's the scale is we don't get it. It's just not in our awareness. And you mentioned eco cities, and I know you have a lot of projects happening in China. Can you talk to us about what the experience for Envac is like there, developing that market, what's exciting to you and where it's going?
Absolutely. And we can feel that there is a big awareness about climate change in China. And also when you are building new developments, it's a big focus. And you would like to adapt the latest technology. And you are doing this fast. I'm also learned about the China speed, and I have seen it, and they adapt to new technology, they implement new technology very, very fast, and they are driving these issues in a very good way, both when it comes to city projects, also when it comes to hospital segment. This is a really fast growing segment for us as well, and here the value for the customer, especially in the eye of the pandemics, is the hygiene and the safety of a good solution. And also here, they adapt the latest technology to increase the patient safety and employees' safety in the hospital. So a lot of good thing is happening in China when it comes to ecological technology.
The Envac system, I know, is in some very high-profile hospitals, like in Beijing. You have a system in place in Hainan, in the Cancer Institute Hospital on Hainan Island in the south. Was the pandemic, did that increase the awareness in hospitals of this idea of, can we use a pneumatic waste disposal system, thinking about either materials that might be compromised, infectious disease, COVID-19? Is there a safer, more efficient way to remove this type of material and dispose of it? And was that a driver for Envac, or is that a driver for your business?
Yeah, it is. There was a demand before in hygienic solution when it comes, but the value of this have increased after the pandemic. We can see that it's a big focus area now if you're planning a new hospital, to make sure that you have a hygienic solution. But this is a driver. And for example, for hospital, we have solution for waste in different categories. We also have solution for linen. It's almost as much linen as waste in a hospital. But our latest development is also to handle the infectious waste in our system. And that is a big headache for the hospitals. And now we also have a solution for that. And we are, for the moment, building 2 hospitals in France. There is one in Rennes that will be in operation now this fall. So, you are right. Due to this pandemic, it will be a driver for a good solution, more hygienic solution also in the hospital. But we have the same benefits also for the cities. Here you have the sealed solution, and will have a hygienic advantages compared to traditional waste handling. So things that we discussed, the resilience, the hygienic is a benefit you perhaps don't think about when you plan the area for the waste management, that will have big benefits in the end, how good the living area will be.
I ran a center called the Collider, working with organizations here in America like NOAA, and their data arm is called NCEI, the National Center for Environmental Information. So that houses all of America's weather data going back to captains' logs on sailing ships like 200 years ago, dipping thermometers in buckets to understand temperature and have these readings. It's really cool. And I ran the center in Western North Carolina, looking at data and trying to build these climate analytic tools and understand how do we adapt to climate change? How do we use data? I know Envac uses a lot of data. And one of the things that, from a health perspective, is the rise in airborne spread of infectious disease. And one of the reasons for it that we can see in America today is as the climate warms, you can see different types of insects can travel further or into climates where they weren't before. So in America, we have Lyme disease. It's a big issue. That's spreading, right? And so a change in climate also has this impact on infectious disease. And then we have to become more resilient to that. Now that you and I are having this conversation and I'm thinking about what does that mean for waste, all of these unfortunate trends make a system like Envac that much more important for safety and hygiene.
Yeah, you really nailed it.
Maybe I should come work for you guys because
Exactly.
let's talk about one of the things you mentioned, Joakim, that is really cool. And we're going to link to some of these videos in the show notes for this episode is I've seen in systems, I think in Madrid and maybe elsewhere, where you see someone walking with their trash and they're coming to an Envac, either a chute or a door, and it's touchless, right?
Yeah.
They hold up their hand or they hold up a fob, or you have some technology where that door, no one has to touch it. Speaking of hygiene, right, of like, and then they throw their bag in or they toss it in, close the door, they walk away, and all of the magic happens behind that door, right? But the technology you guys are developing on top of the waste collection, we're talking about the tubes as like the future, but really you've built this other layer of technology on top of it. Can you talk about that innovation in the technology layer?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. This is also a possibility if you have this technology, because you can work with the interface to the customer. As you said, now we would like to make it very easy and convenient for the users. So touchless, of course, it's no problem to have that. And as I said before, address this with a good app that are measuring how good you are in sorting and can educate you to be better. I think to make it good, it should be very simple to use, very clean to use. And here you should use the technology. So I strongly believe in technology to help us reduce the climate problems that we have. Easy to use for each persons. So that's what we're working a lot with, to have good interface and the good feedback to the users.
Yeah, that piece of the feedback I find interesting. There's a lot of research, a lot of companies have tried. I know one company for many years, I think they still exist in America, called O-Power, was focusing on this idea around energy use of showing you, okay, here's your energy use on your bill. Everybody gets that every month. Here's your neighbor's energy use, and trying to create this sort of feedback loop to help someone understand, okay, how am I doing? And so it sounds like you've developed that technology so that people in different cities can also see, how am I doing? Am I reducing waste? Am I recycling more? Am I saving money? Right?
Exactly.
That kind of feedback loop, right?
This is important also overall for the city, because they need to improve and to fulfill the targets that we have, both the UN Sustainability Development Goals, and in Europe we have these circular economy goals to reduce and minimize the waste. So this data is so you can see the reduction and the benefits. But to make it happen, we strongly believe it should be done to the users. And your description is really good. And if you have that information, people normally would like to do right and also would like to be better. So this gamification is also important, where you can compare it with others or other parts of a city or another city. That is what we focus on now very much in the R&D, how to come down to each end user, so to speak, to help them improve or help them encourage the behavior.
Yeah, there was a company here for a long time. This guy, Ron Gonen, started it. He went to work for the city of New York as the recycling czar afterward, and now runs a really great investment company for a circular economy. But Ron started this company called Recycle Bank probably about 20 years ago. And the dream, the vision, which never quite met reality, was we will track exactly how much you are recycling, right? And we will reward you for that. But they have to put sensors on garbage trucks, and there's a lot of, it never quite delivered on the vision. But your technology, right? Like I was reading about, I think it's I may say the city wrong, but is it Bergen in Norway, right?
You're absolutely right.
You can recycle as much as you want. The door opens, you can recycle, you can compost, right? But you can only throw your trash that's going to the landfill. That door's only opening for you 5 times, right? Yeah. For somewhere like, right? But the data has to be so precise in order for a city to roll out a solution like that.
Yeah. But that's the good thing. If you working with the automated waste collection, you can actually do this. We can add sensors. We can measure both in volume and in weight. And what you mentioned now is this pay as you throw.
Yes,
and that's also very strong. And Bergen is a really good example. So if you make it correct, recycle, etc., a low fee. Or no fee, but if you don't do it, then you have to pay for that. And people understand the dollar, so that's one way to increase the behavior. And many cities are doing this or going in this direction. For example, in Seoul, they are tackling the food waste with the pay as you throw, with really good result, and use the organic waste for bioenergy. So here is a very good awareness. But you also need a reliable system for this to, as you said, measure this correct and deliver the data, in this case, both in Bergen and Seoul, to the city. And that is something we work very much on, to let the technology help for us to improve in these areas.
Yeah, I love that. I want to come back to the carbon reduction benefit. So Envac, you have data that shows that cities can reduce carbon up to 90% by deploying this pneumatic waste collection system. Garbage trucks are not running on individual streets to collect garbage. The trash flows to a central location. It makes pickup from there to a final destination much more streamlined. Lots of ways that carbon gets taken out of the system. My question for you is, when did Envac realize that was something the world cared about, and that was something your service and product delivered on in terms of carbon reduction, right? Because you weren't talking about that at Disney World in 1971, I don't think, right? No. So when did this kind of awareness come at Envac to say, hey, you know what, we have a solution that solves many of these big 21st century challenges?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I said, initially we started, and this was a typical engineering product. And we can see the market coming now. Yeah, during the past 15 years, that has been very important, because now we are driven by the sustainability targets. And then we started to make these analyses and comparisons, and we can see it's a lot of benefits. So, for example, in many projects in Sweden, where they have the targets to build in a ecological way, as they started, and sustainable way, we started to make this analysis together with the customer. And the benefits is huge.
Yeah. It was interesting when I was talking with some friends about discovering these automated waste collection systems and doing some writing about it. One of my friends who's from Sweden, she wrote and she said, this is so interesting to me because I grew up in Sweden. I just thought this was normal.
Yeah.
And now you're like, everyone's discovering it like it's like, oh my gosh. But I just thought this was the way the world works. This is what we do. Do you feel there's something in the culture of Sweden, your native country, where this technology was invented that enables solutions like this to really, it just seems like there's many types of technologies similar and like Envac that get developed and really use Sweden as the first market to really grow and refine these technologies that then get exported around the world. Is there something about the Swedish culture, do you feel, from a either responsibility or engineering or climate or something, quality of life that you feel is distinguishes and makes this possible?
Interesting. And in Sweden, we are most dark and have a lot of snow 6 months, and I think that's encouraged us to we can be innovative. I think we have an environment that attract innovative business. So it's a good question. But if we change that question, I normally hear, okay, you in Sweden are so good in doing it right to sort it. I don't think it's just a Swedish thing. Here again, if you make a good solution, easy to use, people will adapt wherever, all over the world. So again, I think focus to make a good technology and good solution, and then people will adapt to that for sure. I have heard that so many times. We can't do that even in Norway. They are really good. Or in UK, wherever, if there is a good solution, it will be a really good result when it comes to recycling or other activities. I'm sure of that.
Joakim, thank you so much for speaking with me today and coming on Supercool. It's really been such a pleasure to have a chance to talk with you.
Thank you a lot, Josh. And I think it's really important what you are doing, because communication is so important to increase the awareness. So you're doing a fantastic job, and I'm grateful to be Supercool.